Okay. Hello, and welcome to the celebration of the 75th anniversary of the Fulbright program. My name is Elizabeth Horst. I'm the Minister Counselor for Public Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Berlin, and I'm delighted to be here tonight. And I say, dear Cathleen, Fulbrighters, panelists, friends who are watching, it's really great that we can all gather in this forum. I arrived in Berlin earlier this year. It's an honor for me to be a part of Germany's Fulbright family. I've worked with Fulbright commissions around the world, but it's well known that the German Commission has one of the strongest and most diverse programs in the world. And that's due in no small part to the generosity and support of the German government. On behalf of the United States, I thank you. Today is German American Day, and it's a day when in the United States we celebrate the role that German immigrants have played in shaping America over the course of the past 4 centuries. It's also a tribute to the bonds we share as friends and partners. Senator Fulbright never dreamed that the program that bears his name would grow to such global proportions. It's living proof of the power of educational exchanges, and it's a pillar of U.S. public diplomacy. Senator Fulbright dared people to think unthinkable thoughts, and today, in the face of enormous challenges, that initiative and courage is more important than ever. We confront a global pandemic, a deepening climate emergency, a technological revolution that is reshaping every aspect of our lives, cyber and digital threats, international economic disruptions, humanitarian crises, violent extremism, terrorism, and none of these challenges can be addressed by any one nation acting alone. But the diversity of resources that intersecting networks of academic and research communities in partnership with governments and the private sector can make us transform these challenges. Those networks are already helping us to find solutions by thinking the same unthinkable thoughts, imagining what seems to be impossible, like developing a new vaccine in record time. Thanks to the inspiration and vision that comes of sharing scholarship across borders, the challenges we face can indeed become opportunities. One thing is certain, this is undoubtedly the role the Fulbright Commission can and will play in the 21st century, in its next 75 years. Later in this evening's program, a panel of brilliant Fulbright alumni will be examining this topic. This moment in time calls for us to lean forward, and that goes particularly for strong partners like Germany and the United States. This moment in time demands creative approaches that draw on the diversity of our countries, our vibrant economies, our dynamic civil societies, and innovative technological base, and the broad and deep network of partnerships and alliances we share. 75 years ago, if you were to ask an expert to define what constitutes the wealth of a nation, you would probably hear about the size of the country's landmass, the number of people in its population, the strength of its military, or its natural resources. But this is an analogy that Secretary of State Antony Blinken often uses. As he explains, today more than ever, the true wealth of the nation is its people, and the potential for a country or a group of countries to fully unleash those human resources to meet their potential, to learn, to create, to innovate, to question, to think the unthinkable, is the best measure of the wealth of nations. I think Senator Fulbright would agree. His vision 75 years ago is what makes the Fulbright program today so extraordinary. And with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague from Germany's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Vito Cicere. Vito, so good to see you.
Thank you, Elizabeth Horst. Dear Cathleen Fisher, dear Fulbright community, dear colleagues, excellencies, a very warm welcome to this Fulbright Germany Day. My name is Vito Cecere. I'm Director for Research and Academic Relations Policy in the Federal Foreign Office, and I'm very happy to be here today. This is a very beautiful place to be. I think after all this time in the pandemics, it's good to be together here and to have this conversation and the reception after that in the evening. So it's good to be here, and I'm very honored to open this event, which is also taking place on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the Global Fulbright Program. and 70 years after Chancellor Konrad Adenauer and US High Commissioner McCloy signed the German-American Fulbright Agreement. And what could be more appropriate as to introduce our new executive director of the German-American Fulbright Commission, Dr. Fisher. A very special welcome to you. You convinced our board a few months ago with your vision of a contemporary and strong transatlantic approach to Fulbright Germany. With Dr. Fisher in charge, I'm convinced a new chapter has begun. The Federal Foreign Office is looking forward to shaping this chapter together with you. Again, a very warm welcome here in Berlin. Thank you, Dr. Fisher. This is an important time in international relations. The Fulbright network has played and will continue to play a vital role in strengthening not only German-American relations, but also to facilitate cooperation among students, scientists, and future leaders all over the world. Indeed, we are facing an important Fulbright anniversary and global challenges at the same time. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected our lives in uncountable ways. It has also reduced international mobility and exchange in science and research. It is therefore particularly important for the German Federal Foreign Office and its partners, for example, the Fulbright community, to continue the long-lasting tradition of international exchange. The American-German Fulbright Commission has done an amazing job of supporting grantees and keeping exchange going as far as that was possible during the pandemic. And therefore, I would like to thank the whole Fulbright Germany team and beyond for their outstanding work and commitment. Thank you very much. That was very important for all of us, and I think we are so grateful that you have done this for us. Since 75 years, a Fulbright grant has been both a promise and an opportunity. A promise that you're part of a worldwide community and receive support wherever you need it and whenever you need it. And an opportunity to develop your personality and increase your knowledge. Fulbright exchanges have equipped grantees and alumni with a network and the cross-cultural skills to address global challenges over the past 75 years. All of you, alumni and new Fulbrighters, are continuing to have a positive impact throughout the world. Fulbright, therefore, is a bridge, not only between societies, but also a bridge between every single individual and in unwritten future. Today, with contributions from Transatlantic Voices, from the Fulbright Germany network, we are discussing important and contemporary questions. How can we facilitate international cooperation? How to strengthen inclusive leadership for environmental and social justice, sustainability questions, or how can we rebuild trust in expertise and institutions, for example, in science and higher education. From my point of view, these questions require cooperation at all levels, international, regional, and societal. And contributions from the Fulbright community are also valuable and necessary here. We are looking forward to hearing your views on how the Fulbright network can work collectively in finding solutions to some of those compelling changes. And with that, I wish you all an inspiring Fulbright Germany Day, and I will give over to Dr. Cathleen Fisher, our new Executive Director. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vito Cecere. My thanks also to Elizabeth Horst for the welcome words, for joining us this afternoon, and really for reminding us of why this celebration of the Fulbright program and of the Fulbright community in Germany are so important. My name is Cathleen Fisher, and I would like to join in that welcome. I don't know whether it's good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where our participants are coming from, but it is a pleasure to be here. One housekeeping note, first, please note that we are recording this session so that we can make it available to others in the Fulbright community or other partners who might be interested in the discussion today. And now that brings me to the reason for our gathering today. Fulbright Germany is very pleased and honored to join the wide array of Fulbright commissions and U.S. embassies around the world in commemorating this 75th anniversary of the Fulbright program. As Vito Cecere and Elizabeth Horst have noted, on this day, Fulbright Germany has been organizing several events to celebrate the transnational bonds, from individual to communal to binational, that have been created and sustained by the Fulbright program. But we also want to take this opportunity to look forward to new challenges, new opportunities, and how Fulbright needs to continue to adapt to a changing world. We come today to you live from the UREF campus in Berlin-Schöneberg, which is one of Berlin's hubs for innovation and sustainability, so really a very appropriate place for this conversation today. For those of you who have had an opportunity to visit the campus, you may have noted the quote from Elinor Ostrom, it's over in the corner, an American political economist and recipient of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences, and I quote, "A core goal of public policy should be to facilitate the development of institutions that bring out the best in humans," end quote. And that strikes me as a very appropriate bridge to the topic of our discussion this afternoon, which is the Fulbright Network, strengthening collective action on complex global issues. In organizing this panel, we had several goals in mind. First of all, of course, to celebrate the contributions, the impact of the Fulbright program in this special anniversary year. But as I said, we also wanted to look forward to the continued relevance of Fulbright exchanges, to resolution, to the solution finding for these complex global problems that we face. That continued relevance, I think, of course, is first and foremost in the opening of the mind, the global perspective that Fulbright programs bring, but also to the fact that this Fulbright community includes transatlantic leaders from across civil society, in government, in business, public policy, science, education, journalism, and certainly not to forget the arts and humanities, which often ask us the hard questions that we need to ask about the ethical and human impact of our decisions. It is a broad tent, and that is one of its great strengths. In our discussion today of the Fulbright Network's role in addressing complex challenges, however, we also want to look forward, and we have to be mindful that Fulbright needs to be part of the solution in other ways. In our dialogue with other partners who are involved in transatlantic exchanges about how we can develop sustainable cultural and academic exchanges while still preserving that important in-person experience, but also in what actions we need to take to make sure that Fulbright exchanges reflect the rich diversity of our changing societies. And that also means addressing barriers to inclusion, in other words, equity. Because we're going to need to draw on the full talent of our societies and engage a wide range of stakeholders and societal sectors to tackle the global challenges that we face, as we've seen the last more than a year and a half with the coronavirus pandemic, and of course now with the looming climate crisis. So on this day of celebration for the Fulbright program, we look forward to exploring with the alumni of the program and with you, our participants online, on how the network could facilitate cooperation across local, regional, and international levels, and among the public, private, and non-governmental sectors. Also, how they might contribute to rebuilding trust in institutions, including science, higher education, media. And thirdly, how we can strengthen inclusive leadership for environmental and social justice. But before we get to those topics, I want to take a brief time out right now because we'd like to introduce a few interactive elements in the hope of bringing you closer to our panelists today and vice versa. We are going to be using the platform Slido to collect questions and also to ask you a few questions here at the beginning so we know a little bit more about you, the participants in this virtual room. If you can take out your phones, your tablets, or whatever you're using, and go to slido.com, slido.com, or you can follow the link that is available in the YouTube chat function. You'll have to tap in an event code, hashtag 579542. Of course, look again in the YouTube chat to find that, and that should give you access to Slido. So what we'd like to do now is ask a few questions as our virtual icebreaker and our warm-up for the discussion this afternoon. First question, we would like to know where you are participating from today, what country, what part of the world, so we can get a sense of the geographic location of our participants today. Hang on one second, we should be seeing a real-time word cloud emerge of where you are located. I'm seeing Berlin, so that's a natural, Berlin and USA. We'll see if some other responses come in. Okay. Let me move on now to the next question. We're also interested in knowing what sector you're active in. We have a diversity of Fulbrighters in many different fields. There is a multiple choice question. Public sector, academia, NGO, business, or a student. If you could please let us know where you are. Very good. You see here the results coming up on the screen. Many in academia, but also in the non-governmental sector, business and government service, and some who are also students. Excellent, thank you. Now let me turn to our third question, and that is, our discussion topic today is pressing global challenges. What do you think the most important, the most urgent global challenges are that we are facing today? If you could tap in your thoughts about what you see as the most pressing challenges, we'll wait here for a few minutes. Okay, you'll see emerging the word cloud, the largest words, of course, representing the greatest number of responses. Climate change, sustainable climate. Okay. But we have also seen Taiwan, Afghanistan, biodiversity. Excellent. We'll wait just a minute more for your responses to come in. All right. Very good. Thank you for joining us in this interactive element. We will come back at the end and have one additional question that we hope that you will also participate in that poll as well. Now I want to turn, with no further ado, to our panel and the introduction of our panelists. In putting together this panel, we wanted to draw on the diversity of generations, but also of professions in the Fulbright network, and also draw on our alumni networks in Germany and also in the United States. I'm going to introduce each of our three panelists briefly. For more information on their backgrounds, I would refer you to the bios that were sent along with our invitation. Following my invitations, we'll then have a first round of statements in response to a question, and then a little bit of follow-up discussion among the panelists. And I'm very glad to see that Paul Berkman is here, joining us from Massachusetts. So Paul, great to see you.
Yes.
And then we want to open it up to your questions, and we will be using Slido again for your questions. But let me begin, first of all, to my immediate left, as you can see on our screen, is Professor Dr. Paul Arthur Berkman. He is a two-time Fulbrighter, a Fulbright Distinguished Scholar in 2009, and a Fulbright Norway Arctic Chair 2021-22. His research and his professional career reflect that really of an exemplary science diplomat, someone who is applying, training, and refining informed decision-making to balance national interests and common interests for the benefit of all on the Earth across generations. He's an internationally renowned explorer, educator, and author who has made significant contributions to the sustainable development of our world during the past 3 decades. Paul Berkman, welcome, and thank you for being here across many time zones.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Then to my left, to Paul's left, as you're looking at the screen here, is Mirja Fiedler, a German grantee at a U.S. university, 2004-2005. She is an anchor, a correspondent, and head of newsroom for German public broadcasters. She's a journalist working for the main TV news program at NDR in Hamburg, and she covers the 5 northern states, the Länder, as well as world news. She also reports for the daily German national television news program at ARD. Welcome, Mirja Fiedler.
Thank you.
To Mirja's left is Denius, I hope I got that right, D. Polk, who was an English teaching assistant in 2011-2012. Dee is also a former Cheng Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, and he is strongly committed to creating a more diverse and more equitable future workforce and to generally uplifting communities. He has served as director of the Mississippi Apprenticeship Program, MAP, where he worked to expand its apprenticeships in the state based on the research that he did on the German vocational education training system as a German Chancellor Fellow. Dee, thanks very much for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I'd like to open with a question really for all panelists. And our panelists reflect the broad spectrum of experience that we find in the Fulbright network. What they share in common, of course, also is that they are all Fulbrighters. So in the spirit of this 75th anniversary, I'd like to start, Paul, with you, but then turn to Mirja and Dee to ask you to reflect both on the impact of your Fulbright experience on your professional path, what you're committed to right now, but also what you see as the most important contribution that Fulbrighters can make in the future. So let me start first with Paul Berkman. Paul, floor is yours.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Vito. It's a pleasure and an honor to contribute virtually to this discussion. I wish I were there in Germany with you. I think the 75th anniversary provides context. The 75 years ago was shortly after the Second World War, and Germany was a significant component of the Second World War. My family originated, my mother was born in Mannheim, left in 1938 in October, just before Kristallnacht. I'm honored to say that I'm now a repatriated German citizen. So in a sense, the 75 years provides context of where we are as a globally interconnected civilization. And the notion of world wars means without ambiguity that we are globally interconnected. These are not regional or continental. The slide behind me is Antarctica. And to the credit of Senator Fulbright, he was the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Treaty when the Antarctic Treaty of 1959 came up for ratification. And the Antarctic Treaty brought together the United States and the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War to think in terms of matters of common interest. And in Antarctica, as well as outer space, throughout the Cold War, these two superpower adversaries cooperated continuously, despite the animosities, isolated them in every other geopolitical sphere. Those same lessons that were relevant in 1961, 1959, are urgent today as well. In a world where we have the pandemic, where we have technological change, where we have climate, all of which are urgent, but over different timescales. We can see in the world today, the pandemic, exponential change, mortality and loss of livelihoods, impacts across the planet at this time scale of months to years. We can see technological change over the time scale of years to decades, bits on a transistor increasing orders of magnitude between the 1960s and the present. And we can see exponential change over decades to centuries in terms of human population growth and increases of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The challenges we face as a globally interconnected civilization operate across different timescales, short to long term. But our responsibility, primary responsibility, and I speak specifically to next generation leaders, specifically, is with hope and inspiration. There is far too much gloom and doom in the world. The Fulbright program provides us with the opportunity to think and imagine a world that if we think it, we can build it. And in my case, I'm inspired by Jules Verne, who wrote in 1865, From the Earth to the Moon, and in 1870, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It took a century to realize that science fiction becoming science reality. The challenges we face today operate across generations. The challenges of next generation. Reality is that young people today will be alive in the 22nd century. Every generation today and into the future has a global responsibility. And it is with hope and inspiration that the Fulbright program and the opportunity to be part of Germany as a German citizen, the United States as a United States citizen, but really as a citizen of the world, is with lifelong passion. And I thank the Fulbright program for the opportunity to share these insights.
Thank you, Paul. You've struck some wonderful notes that I hope we can return to in the discussion. But let me turn now to Mirja. You are a journalist. You deal in the business of providing information, including on complex global challenges. Perhaps you could reflect on how your Fulbright experience has shaped that professional experience, but also what you see as the challenge going forward. Mirja, please.
Thank you. Yeah, my Fulbright year is still influencing me in my work today, because I think knowledge is the key to mutual understanding. And of course, you need information for that, and to gather information, to select it, and to publish it. That's the key, so that everyone can form his or her opinion based on this knowledge. And that's what I learned during my Fulbright year. And of course, it changed now during the time with the rise of social media, that everybody is able to publish opinions and information, and that's also a challenge for journalists, but also for everyone else, but also a great opportunity. And that's what I'm trying to do in my job, to give orientation, to inform the public, so that everybody is able to form his or her opinion. And as you can see, within seconds, you can reach via the World Wide Web people. In former times, it was the traditional television, radio, and programs, and was just one-sided, and now it's a discussion. So we receive information from the users. We can filter this and use it for our reports, and that's a great opportunity. And I think that's also the task of journalists, but also for Fulbright alumni, to learn for a lifetime. And that's what I learned during my year, and what I'm trying to give back in my job.
Very good. Thank you, Mirja. I want to touch you, because both you and Paul also mentioned the tremendous impact of technology, how it has changed how we communicate, the reach that we have. But Dee, I'd like to turn to you, because while technology has allowed us to reach new communities with information, it still remains the fact, and we've seen this particularly acutely in the last year, the coronavirus pandemic, that there are many communities who still are excluded from making the decisions that matter on these complex problems. I wonder if you could reflect and share with us a bit about the impact of your Fulbright experience, how that has woven through your subsequent professional activities, and where you see the challenges for the future.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure. I wanted to first say hello to my mama and my family back home in the U.S. It's very important to me that I'm always saying hello. So where to begin? 75 years, I'm celebrating my 10-year anniversary of Fulbright. 2011, I completed my English teaching assistantship in Frankfurt am Main at the Hans-Böckler-Schule, it's a Berufsschule, and that exposure really changed my life. I was all set to become a State Department diplomat, was on track to become that, but realized when I was in the room during my Fulbright year, that I was the only one in the room who looked and sounded like me. The only person of color in my year, that I know of at least, and the only connection. And so it was one of those things where I always sort of noticed, and towards the end of my year decided, you know what, I want to actually do something about that. I want to get to work focusing on my community, focusing on my people back home in Mississippi, where I'm from. And so that meant a lot. That meant going back home and saying, you know what, forget grad school, forget all the fancy stuff that you sort of attach yourself to after you complete a Fulbright program. Instead, I said, let me get to work. And so my first job when I got back was as a security guard at a refinery in my hometown. Really trying to figure out, how do I latch myself onto my state? I care about my state so much and I want to do something. It led to me thankfully, getting into public policy, getting into politics, getting into all the things that help people. But you know that my main focus was on education. And that education that I focused on and really bringing vocational education training, apprenticeships to Mississippi, all of that was grounded in my Fulbright experience. The time I spent at the Hans Böckler Schule teaching the next industry Handelskammer experts, the next Bürokauf people, the folks who are really going to be defining Germany's next workforce. And so I was like, let me bring this back to the US. Let me focus on how do we bring actual tangible solutions back home. And that's been my career, navigating and really interrogating this tension between the US and Germany and what the future holds, what the transatlantic partnership holds. Because as much as I love Fulbright, and as much as I love the senator who created this, Senator Fulbright, the magic behind it, the fact of the matter is, as I got home, once I got home and I started dealing with the realities of back home, the politics of back home, the people who are suffering back home, Fulbright wasn't in that discussion. And truly, with all of the energy and the focus behind so much of the movements that we're talking about and we throw out as buzzwords, it all begins with what began 75 years ago with Fulbright, when the senator sort of pushed forward this idea, in spite of his being against the Civil Rights Act, that I believe in the world, and I believe that we should not have war with one another. That's a powerful idea that we have to think about today. And so when we talk about the future, the next 75 years, let's not talk about the next 75 years. Let's talk about the next first year, 1 year. Let's talk about the next 25 years so that we get to 100 with more equity and more thought around how do we make sure that the people of my hometown, people of Pascagoula, also get a chance to come to Fulbright, also get a chance to be in this room und die Möglichkeit auch Deutsch zu lernen. Ja? Also ich finde, das ist ein wichtiger Thema. That's exactly when we get to the point where things are about to get really interesting and nitty-gritty, it's almost as if the transatlantic partnership is starting to fade away. There's so many people who have been left out of this partnership and this dialogue for so long. The single mama who works at Walmart with 3 kids but goes to college at community college to try to do more for her family. She never gets Fulbright. And that's a shame. And I'm here today to talk about that. And so I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Dee, thanks very much. One of the things that struck me in listening to your opening statements is really, it is the element of change. And I say this, when I was, during my Fulbright year, the transatlantic agenda was driven very much by national security issues, arms control. And Paul has talked about his experience working internationally between the US, USSR at that time for cooperation in the Antarctic. It's a changing agenda, in some ways a much more diverse agenda that digs deep into our societies, facing problems of how do we deal with misinformation, also about questions of equity and inclusion, and trust in institutions. And it's really that latter point that I'd like to focus a bit on. If we think about solutions to complex problems, it's going to require some rebuilding of trust. And Miriam, maybe I would start with you, because you spoke about the opportunities that technology has provided, but there's also been some downside risks in terms of information. So how do we start rebuilding trust in information, which I think is a fundamental ingredient for wise policymaking? Then I'd like to turn to Paul and to Dee after that. So Miriam, please first.
Yeah, I think we have to show, as journalists, but also as Fulbright alumni, to make everything transparent, that people see how we work, and of course, we all can mistakes and can make mistakes, and then also say, okay, this is how we came to our conclusion, and this is how we report, and that's a way to make it transparent. And via social media, you can take the users, viewers, listeners into the newsrooms with your smartphone and go live. They can, as we do it now, people can listen to us and ask questions right away. And I think that's one of the key issues, how to regain trust. And another important thing is to go out to the people and talk to them directly, not report about them, but to meet them, to talk to them, to explain how we do our work. I think that is a big issue.
Let me pick up on that and turn to Paul, because Paul, you are a science diplomat, and that means science engaging with society, science also engaging with matters of policy. But science often involves a lot of complex information. So how do we do that? And what role do you see for the Fulbright Network, maybe in fostering stronger science diplomacy?
Given the complexity, the challenge is to simplify. We live in a complex world, and it's beyond the ken of any one individual, any group of institutions, any individual nation. It's a world that we have to work together in. I would take a step back and think about what the Fulbright program has as an opportunity for humanity. It seeks to integrate, to create triangulation, synergies between education, research, and leadership. The individuals who are Fulbright awardees are all leaders. And the opportunity to create synergies from their experience, to think in ways of inclusion, is the opportunity, a gift, really, to the world in terms of building common interests among allies and adversaries alike, rather than trying to resolve conflicts. And I would say the lesson that I've learned since I was 22, wintering over in Antarctica, the ocean behind me, 2 degrees below centigrade water, scuba diving throughout a year in Antarctica when I was 22. The lessons that I've learned since then is that there's a fundamental choice that we all have, and that is to think in terms of conflict or to think in terms of common interests in any relationship, whether it's with a family member, governments, whatever the relationship is. There's a choice at the beginning of any discussion to start the discussion based on conflict or to start the discussion based on common interests. And most of the time in the world that we live in today, because of the diversity of voices, inevitably the discussion starts from conflict. And I would say the Fulbright program has as an opportunity to accelerate and emphasize the opportunity for individuals and nations to think in terms of common interests. I would say that as a challenge, and certainly not something that I can accomplish by myself, but as a challenge, in this world today with the pandemic, the challenge in terms of common interest building is for the United States, Russia, and China together to figure out how, as superpowers, to solve the global pandemic over the timescale of months to years. Larger, longer timescales dealing with climate over decades to centuries, or cybersecurity over years to decades, are necessary to address. But if we can't get our home in order at the timescale of months to years, we will send the wrong signal to the future. And I think this is an opportunity to elevate that level of question among all of us in terms of how we approach the immediacies that are at hand. The challenge is not that the pandemic will end, it is how it will end. Will it end in acrimony among nations, or will the nations of the world send a clear signal to the future that we are hopeful, we can transform? We're looking at the 20th century. We had world wars, reality check. They weren't national wars, they were world wars. They weren't continental. World went from national to international in the 20th century. And Dee talked about inclusion, local to global inclusion. It also involves subnational. There is a jurisdictional spectrum that we have to traverse as a civilization, subnational, national, international, to build the sustainable solutions and future that we imagine.
Paul, let me pick up on your last point and turn to Dee. We need the notion that we need from local to global inclusion along that spectrum. Dee, let me turn to you because you've worked at the local level. You know what that involves, what challenges are. Perhaps you could reflect a bit on that, but also particularly on how Fulbright might become part of that solution of building a more cooperative and inclusive dialogue about problem solving.
Yeah, the thing that pulled me back home was this idea that I could make a difference. And coming from the community I come from, you get sort of down and out, I think, when it comes to sort of imagining yourself in this world, this crazy world of ours that we're in now. And so during my time as a Fulbright scholar, I got to focus on the connections to my students that in ways that they never were connected with before. And so what I mean by that is, so I mostly worked with refugee students, recently arrived students. I did my Fulbright in 2011, and these students were some of the most brilliant students I've ever come across, but they had just arrived in Germany from war-torn countries. And it's so crazy to think back on 10 years ago, how similar they were in the stories that they had and the challenges and the situations that they faced. How similar, even though they were refugees and coming from war-torn countries, how similar they were to people back home, to the people I grew up with, and to my young cousins. And I think about that as we're looking towards the future and what this transatlantic partnership, this international global connection means to one another. And it's how do we ensure that we're bringing the best of all people to the equation and to the fore and navigating these challenges that we're dealing with. I'm a very optimistic person. I'm an optimistic guy in general. And for me, I see what we could become, but I'm focused on the institution now, Fulbright as it exists now. And how are we going to make sure that Fulbright becomes the institution that it needs to become for the future? There's no point talking about how we want to become more diverse and bring in more thought if the institution itself does not facilitate the dialogue and conversation that moves us further as people. And so that's the question. I don't know yet if Fulbright has that answer. I look at my Fulbright year and how I could, to be very real and frank, I could barely survive off of the stipend I received as an ETA, for instance. And so when you think of that and the fact that I just talked about the single mama with 3 kids who deserves an opportunity, if she is selected as a Fulbright scholar, to come here, but she can't afford to come here. That's the question that we're in. That's where we are. And so when we're talking about the complex issues, we're missing half of our people. Half of the people who have input, we're missing them just because they're socioeconomically not equipped to do Fulbright. We have to change that, and we have to do it. Now we have to do it with expediency and with a fervor, because where are we going otherwise? That's the question.
Thanks, Steve. Mary, would you like to come in on this from your own perspective, and this question of local to global inclusion and the dialogue, who needs to be sitting at the table? What role do you see for those who are in journalism and the business, as you said, of reaching out, going into the communities increasingly because information is reaching them? What role do you see then for journalists, for example?
Yeah, it's also a big topic in journalism or in reporting, because there are some people who don't feel represented anymore by the coverage, and yes, and of course the debates oftentimes are focused on political elites and people, who influence the main discourse. And so it's really important to go out to those communities, to those people who feel left behind, and listen to them, and also talk with them and report about their topics they feel are important. And I think that's also the task of public broadcasting in Germany, to include all the groups in society, and to talk about topics that other media, which are more profit-driven, don't look at. So that's also a big topic, and I think also there's more diversity in the newsrooms. When you look at the anchors who start at the moment at a national level, you can see that it's a more diverse spectrum and reflects society more than years ago. So there's quite a change going on at the moment.
I just want to note, I think that here, as you talked about news anchors, that's something that's visible to people. It is an envisioning process. Can I see myself in their role? Can I see myself as part of your network? To your point, Dee, about one of the challenges for Fulbright looking forward. Paul, I'd also like to ask you in some ways the same question, but from the angle of the kind of work that you do, engagement with other governments, really at the international level. And particularly, what could we do perhaps concretely to make better use of this global Fulbright network? We're celebrating 75 years. So in your field of activity, the issues that you work on, where is the untapped potential of the Fulbright network that you would like to see us tap into and activate?
Listening to the comments and the notion of making a difference, the notion of people who influence the main discourse. I think the lesson of the Fulbright program is that individuals, we as individuals, as Fulbright awardees, have the opportunity to influence the main discourse. And perhaps the best example is a personal one. I'm not a government official. I never have been. I don't represent governments, but I can see the challenges we face in the world. And recognizing those challenges, in 2010, I brought together the first formal dialogue between NATO and Russia. Now, in Russia, the primary source of war is NATO. But I brought together a formal dialogue that involved 4 ministries in Russia and a representative to the president of the Russian Federation, 17 governments at the level of ambassadors talking to each other about security in the Arctic. It was the first formal dialogue that was convened on that topic. Had to go through the entire NATO-Russia Council with approval by 28 nations at the level of ambassadors. If it's possible for an individual like me to do something to inspire by their actions, to think in terms of making a difference and to act. And I would say that the element of science in this discussion is more broad than the natural sciences or the social sciences or indigenous knowledge, all of which reveal patterns and trends and processes that become the bases for decisions, albeit with different methods. The challenge we face is to respond to change. And change is recognized by individuals in various ways. And so, in a sense, what can Fulbright do? I would say continue along its current path in terms of inspiring next generation leaders to think with hope and inspiration, to create the opportunity to imagine the future and to build the future. This is what I've learned from my experiences in many dialogues. And I talk with presidents and prime ministers. I remember speaking to the entire NATO-Russia Council and all of the admirals in the NATO Maritime Command, 100 admirals in the audience. I'm not a military person, but speaking with hope, speaking with clarity in terms of how we address the future is an opportunity. And I think research and leadership. The world today, we teach math, we're reading, writing in every language, infinite, effectively, and instantaneous information. The opportunity is to think in terms of making informed decisions. I believe that can begin in terms of K through 12 with basic education, move to universities in terms of basic research skills, and move into professions in terms of leadership skills. I train this to many foreign ministries, the diplomatic corps of nations, in terms of thinking about informed decision-making. But the real inspiration of this is to translate this at every educational level across the world, to think beyond just fundamental skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic, which are necessary, but are no longer sufficient in a world where we have infinite and instantaneous access to information.
Mirja, informed decision-making, which you touched on initially. What role specifically, what's your vision for the role of the Fulbright community and of Fulbrighters when we think about fostering more informed decision-making, particularly something that you have to deal with, I think, a lot in your daily work?
Yeah. I think that's a good point you made, that everyone can make an impact. I mean, every Fulbrighter can get out this information there, or just first of all listen to the other side, and that's also, as a journalist, as a reporter, I should tell the stories from all different views and angles, and present them and get them out to the public. And I think that's also a task of of everyone that we represent the Fulbright program, and we can try to connect people and get this information out there and give everybody the opportunity to use his or her own voice and encourage other people to use it.
Do you have to turn to you now? What's your vision if we think about informed decision making and a changing Fulbright network?
Yeah, you know, thank you again for having me. And I think the big thing for me is I can always speak from a place of deficit when it comes to Fulbright, that there's always something that was wrong. But the fact of the matter is it was a magical experience for me, and it was so important. And I just want it to be accessible for everybody. And so that's what I really focus on. When I think of what Fulbrighters can do, Zukunft gestalten, create the future, build the future, be brave in doing it. You know, we get this moment in time to come to Germany as a Fulbrighter, or wherever you go as a Fulbrighter, and you get a chance to really think. And I mean, the emphasis behind Fulbright and creating it was this opportunity, this idea behind thinking and creating so much that has been good for this world. We need even more now, and we need it in a way that is encompassing of so many realities, realities that we just never talked about before. And that's the reality of not just someone who looks like me, but also of the conservative guy who's trying to figure out how to provide for his family and lives in a place, a low income, economically strapped location in any southern state in the US. The questions that he has are just as relevant in this setting and in this space as everyone else's. And it's very important that both the institution of Fulbright, but also Fulbrighters, are brave in discussing the people and the things that aren't as in vogue in these spaces, because those people are so important. And we see what the alternative is. I was in Germany when the US Capitol was stormed. I'm sitting on my couch with a friend, and I get a call from a buddy. I'm watching my country be torn apart from Germany. You have to be brave in doing this work, but I mean, we're at an unprecedented time. And I challenge everyone, not just the Fulbright as an institution, but also the folks doing it. Recognize first your privilege, because more than likely, if you're doing Fulbright, you're privileged. I was privileged to do it. But what can you do with it? Because the fact of the matter is, more than likely, someone who would have been even better in that room wasn't in that room because of your privilege. So check that and imagine what more you could do. Yeah, that's my challenge.
Paul, I can see you sort of taking notes. So what can I bring you on this? Would you like to respond? This really is supposed to be a conversation, really, among you, the three of you as well. Please.
So I think the comments resonate with the notion that the Fulbright program opens doors. And it really is a matter of initiative and imagination on the part of the Fulbright awardees as to how they use that opportunity. But you, as Fulbright awardees, wherever you are, have the opportunity to introduce yourself and to at least have an opening discussion with individuals who potentially will create synergies with the types of and activities that you're involved with. I think the Fulbright program also creates the opportunity for individuals to be exposed, to learn about the diversity and richness of different cultures around the world. And you know, as being hopeful, I hope that we are able to train a generation of people that are compassionate, that think in terms of our living in a globally interconnected civilization, not short-term, not national, but live in a globally interconnected civilization. And I saw a recent report about next generation, young people, concerned about climate and the future. The opportunity really is to be hopeful and to imagine the future. If you think it, you can build it. The challenge is to think it. And I think the Fulbright program opens the doors for people to be imaginative at the level of the interests of all humanity across generations.
I can see you nodding. Dee, what are you hopeful about?
Yeah, you know, I'm hopeful of so much. but I've been in Germany now for about a year almost, and it's so amazing walking around Berlin and seeing how much this city has changed even 20 years ago, because I came here in 2002 for the first time, almost had my 20-year anniversary with Germany as well. And you know, that what's going on here in Berlin, I want to share it with everyone. I want to share Germany with everyone. I want to especially share it with folks who, when I talk about Germany back home, they're like, what? Why are you in Germany? What are you doing speaking German? I want the extraordinary reasons by which I'm here on this stage with you all today to become as ordinary as possible, because there's so much magic. As good as we are as a species, as humans, we can go so much further. And I really, really want to see what that holds. I don't want to try to dictate it. I don't want to try and organize it. I just want to bring the people together and let them create what we're going to be.
All right. Before I turn to opening this up, the question to questions from our participants, Mirja, I also want to ask you, you're dealing with, it's also a profession that's been pretty battered and sometimes beaten, and even a little bit riskier than it used to be in terms of journalism reporting. But what gives you hope?
I think that, well, first of all, that we are sitting here, that events start again, that we can talk to each other in person, but also that the pandemic showed that we can talk to each other in a digital world, and that that a young generation grows up and wants to influence life. When you look at Fridays for Future, for example, people are going on the streets, and that the young generation is interested in politics and tries to change the way some things are at the moment. I think that's always good when people are engaged and fight for their opinions and bring their ways into the public discourse. I think that's a good sign.
Good. All right, well, we're going to come back to the conclusion, because I think you've laid down a lot of wonderful ideas and visions and even some gauntlets for the Fulbright Network. But right now I want to turn to some of the questions that are coming through. And please do submit your questions again via Slido, the Q&A function. I want to start with a question from Ian from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Dia, this is a question for you. In your work with trade school students, I'm wondering if you envision their graduation should allow then for a Fulbright ETA position.
Oh, yes. ETA, grantee, yeah, those are, and I think about all the time how I came across so many STEM folks in the US who desperately wanted to come to Germany, and vice versa, being here now. Yeah, desperately. Pre-apprenticeships between Germany and the US would be fantastic. That should have happened a long time ago. But yes, the answer is yes, 100,000%.
Okay, good. Another question. We'll also start with Dee, but I actually think this would be a great one to expand to both Paul and to Mirja. What concrete changes would you like to see Fulbright implement in order to become more inclusive and equitable? Dee, let's start with you, but then I'd like to pose a question also to Mirja and to Paul.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing I've been thinking about, for instance, with Fulbright is the fact that I not just myself, but a lot of friends as well, really struggled with the stipend. And I know it's based off of country and there's some politics and whatnot involved, but I think it's time for a means test of some sort to sort of look at the equity behind this program. You have a blank slot allotment that you give to everybody regardless of income, but the fact of the matter is some folks can afford it and some can't. You look at exchange between the US and Germany. How can you facilitate with Fulbright at the more local level? And so there's all sorts of different things I would do with that in regards to direct investments to fly people from the US to Germany and actually facilitate programming around that. Getting people who never get outside of their state let alone outside of the country, to Germany or to whatever country is important. And you know, the last piece is the most important piece for me around this equity piece, because people talk about equity as if it's like this big, scary word, elephant in the room, like how diverse are you and whatnot. The fact of the matter is, we aren't our best. We aren't our very best. And if you look at Germany and you look at the development of the vaccine here in this country, that was pushed by a person with immigration background, with migrant background, and a woman here. They were the chief architects behind that. Imagine where we can go when we involve everyone in our struggle and our existence as people on this planet. So yeah, I'm sorry, that's my big thing, but those are concrete things, those big three things.
No, I have to say, I love the passion that comes through all of your statements. It's just wonderful. Mirja, concrete suggestions for how we make the Fulbright program more inclusive, more equitable.
I think it would be a good idea to offer more short programs to give people who might not be able to go abroad for a year, for example, just the opportunity to come here or go on an exchange just for a week or 2 weeks, and then they might be so fascinated that they think about how they can stay longer or participate in a new program, and also to send people like participants of the Fulbright program into areas where people are not so privileged, into schools, and start at a young level and tell them about our experiences and motivate them to participate in those programs, to apply and to learn. I think, at the roots where you have those people who might not even know about those programs and those opportunities.
Paul, the same question to you. Concrete ideas for creating a more inclusive Fulbright network and program.
Well, concrete, I think Dee nailed it. I mean, it does come down to support in terms of the program itself. So the question is, what type of concrete solutions can you make that would enhance the available support for meritorious individuals? Perhaps there would be helpful to consider that tap into national agencies. I think the opportunity is to think more broadly about how to support the program so that people aren't disenfranchised, as Dee identified, because they can't afford to take advantage of the opportunity. So that would be a concrete suggestion, is to think more broadly about the partnerships and networks, not only national agencies, but philanthropies that would help to support the global reach of the Fulbright program.
All right, thank you. I now have a question from Jörg Geyer, a question directed to Paul. Paul, how can the Fulbright network be used, and how can we collaborate better to tackle global challenges such as climate change, which was the #1 challenge that was noted here in our poll at the outside? Paul.
Hello, Jörg. I think the opportunity with Fulbright networking starts with questions. What questions can we ask together, where we will identify questions of common concern that we can collectively address, that becomes the evidence and the options for informed decisions. It starts with questions, not the answers. I would actually venture that perhaps the questions are more valuable than the answers, because they facilitate the dialogues among allies and adversaries alike. And so I would say the opportunity with the Fulbright program networking globally is to think in terms of questions. And perhaps as a practical example, the 75th anniversary of the Fulbright program is an opportunity to reach across different efforts to celebrate the 75 years and to think in terms of those underlying questions. And perhaps as an outcome from the 75th anniversary, there'll be more clarity as to what those common interests are that we can continue to build and accelerate across generations.
Thank you, Paul. Dee, would you like to come in? I saw you nodding your head. I just want to make sure that you both have a chance if either of you wants to add anything to that.
Yeah,
okay.
Let's keep the questions going.
Okay, good. We have a question from Mirja. How can Fulbright help fight the massive trend of disinformation and misinformation? How can Fulbright bolster freedom of speech?
That's a very good question. I think that's the same almost as a task of journalists, to get information out there, to try to impact and influence the public dialogue, and to make the communication and the work transparent, and use all channels, like via social media. It's a big opportunity also to become more inclusive and to reach people who are not able to travel, for example, and and just to listen to the people, and also to use the ideas you get via those channels, and just take them as an inspiration, and try to reach people through those ideas, and take them into the program.
I want to pick up on that because I think this is an important point. Using the channels that our target audiences are using, how people get information today to advance the goals of equity and inclusion. But Dee, I want to come back to you. It's a question for you, because it's not just about disseminating information to communities we haven't been reaching, but inspiring and encouraging them to think about a year as a Fulbrighter in Germany as part of their plan. And that may not be something that they necessarily think about. But I listened to the stories that you have told today, all three of you, incredibly inspiring. So I think that has to be part of it. But how do we help people envision that they could belong, that this could be something that would be beneficial to them, beyond just having the information, to encourage them? Is it narratives? Is it having Fulbrighters reach out more to in a very targeted way to the communities we want to include? I mean, what is your sense and what is your experience, Ben? What works?
I mean, I can only speak to myself in that regard, only from the standpoint that I only have one story that I know well, and that's mine. And, you know, for me, the big thing was I wanted to figure out how to help my people back home. And I knew Germany had some answers to questions that I had. And so in figuring this stuff out, and just sort of figuring out what the next step and what you can do, I'm really focused on, so I'm helping to bring Black legislators from Mississippi and Alabama to Germany in the beginning of December. And in doing that, I want to expose them not just to Germany, but also the economic development that goes on here in this country, because there's so much foreign direct investment that flows from Germany to the US, and a lot of that goes to the South. But German companies are coming to my home and to my region, my area, for cheap labor, cheap resources, and cheap taxes. And so that impacts the people of my community in a very real way. And they don't talk to these German companies. The German companies don't really interact with the local leaders. And so now we ask ourselves, how do we get in between that and bring folks together? By facilitating exchange. And so I'm helping to realize that, but especially going back to Fulbright, how does Fulbright do that? How can we do that? Do we provide direct supports? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know what that intrinsic motivation is for others either. But I saw that as something where I could have a direct impact and change the lives of the people I care about, and bring people together as well. And so it's like a win-win-win for everybody, and having conversations and dialogue. But I don't know that answer yet, and I'm working steadfastly to try to figure it out.
Well, we do have one idea that has come in. This is from Stefan Wolf in Bavaria. In order to attract a more inclusive and more diverse audience to Fulbright, would that not imply working much closer with high schools as part of the pipeline of where people are coming from?
Yes, I mean, so my whole connection to Germany started with Congress Bundestag in 2002. I just turned 16 years of age, and I found myself all of a sudden, hier in Germany, in Bredenborn, Nähe von Brakel, Nähe von Paderborn, Bielefeld, Kreis Höxter, that's with a very German family, with a blonde hair, blue eyes, very German family. And it was a time that changed my entire life. It saved my life in a lot of different ways. And yeah, that's a magic that, yeah, if in high school, if I had not done that, I don't know where I would be. Imagine how that was not a heavy cost program. If we could bring thousands of students to international locations to get the experience I had in 2002, it's a game changer. We have to invest in this stuff. The same thing with Senator Fulbright. When he did what he did, he tried to prevent more wars from happening. He tried to prevent the calamities that we face as human beings all the time. He tried to prevent that from happening via exchange. We have to reimagine that with even more fervor and figure out how do we bring people together. Yeah, it starts with high school.
One of the challenges, I think, looking forward, and this has come through in the next question, is the issue of what does a sustainable model of exchange look like? We've talked today about the climate crisis, the need to advance global sustainability. We have a question. Fulbright sends thousands of students from around the world to the US and vice versa each year. What can Fulbright do to become more sustainable? And I would like to add, to become more sustainable while retaining what I think everyone here would agree is an essential experience, and that is there is something about an in-country, face-to-face experience that cannot be replicated digitally. But the challenge is still out there, and we have to have an answer for it. Paul, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but can I bring you in there on this question of what could be the elements of a sustainable model of cultural and educational exchange that would extend Fulbright decades into the future?
Well, I think you've answered the question in part. A sustainable model necessarily operates across generations. And so by thinking decades into the future, you're already moving in that direction. I think that's the opportunity to be inclusive. If we're only thinking about the present, if we're only thinking about self-interests, national interests, we're in a perilous position. We didn't learn the lessons of the 20th century, where nationalism in a world with advanced technologies and industrial capacities is a recipe for global conflict. The challenge we face is to operate across generations, and to be sustainable in part means understanding the context of where we are, not just because we have a lot of people talking at us from various sources, media and so on, but to think of context like the last 75 years and to think 75 years into the future. The context of across generations is not ambiguous. It's not specific, but it's not ambiguous. And I would say this is really where the previous question about high school students fundamentally involved. And I would say even earlier, K through 12 is an opportunity to begin training people to think in terms of common interests rather than conflict. And this is the challenge we face. We're at a transformational moment in our world. And I would say the opportunity to sustain is to think before, through, after the inflection point in the global pandemic, which will happen with certainty. It will end like every plague that has infected humankind forever. It will end. How it ends, however, will make the difference. If it ends in a way where there's division and exclusion and business as usual, per se, it will send the wrong message to the future. And I think the questions that have been emerging in this discussion about inclusion are spot on. The biggest challenge we face at local to global levels is inclusion. That's the biggest challenge. And it's not out of malice. Systems, institutions create boundaries by definition as to how they operate. So systems, the institutions that we look toward, our nations, are designed with boundaries. There is inherent systemic exclusion in the world. It's because that's how the institutions themselves are designed. Yet we live in a globally interconnected civilization. And the challenge is to cross boundaries, to cross those those things that isolate, that create self-interest, recognizing that nations will always first and foremost look after their national interests. But we also live in a globally interconnected civilization. And so the challenge, I think, in terms of sustainability is to be inclusive. And to build global inclusion involves common interests. And I think one of the features that the Fulbright program offers is the opportunity to think and to build common interests with allies and adversaries alike. This has been my journey. I visited all 7 continents on Earth before I was 30. And it's been continuous throughout, thinking in terms of a responsibility for all on Earth across generations. That is inclusive, all on Earth across generations, and not just humans, it's everything on Earth. This is our home planet. We have responsibility at that planetary scale.
Paul, I'd like to thank you particularly because for establishing the link that I think is really clear in this discussion. We have to think about sustainability, but while maintaining mobility and inclusion and diversity. They are all linked, and I think that's probably what the model has to go. I'm mindful of our time, which is now we're moving into the last 15 minutes of our event. I have a couple more questions here that I would like to bring in. The first is, what is your experience as citizen ambassadors in your host country, but also when you went back home? Miriam, let me start with you first. Your experience as a citizen ambassador.
I was welcomed very warmly in the United States, and I was asked many questions about the history of Germany, for example, and it was also there was a lot of interest in German society, and I'm still friends there today, and it was just a great experience and very warm. Like, I got many invitations, which I wasn't even used to in Germany. It's a more it's another atmosphere when you come here, and people there in the United States just invite you to their homes, so it was a very warm welcome, and I really enjoyed it.
Dee, thoughts about your role as a citizen ambassador in Germany, but also as when you went back to the United States?
Yeah. I mean, my Fulbright year was, I had folks ask me all sorts of different things. I had one student from Afghanistan ask a question around if slavery still existed back in the US. I had a question, all sorts of different things. So that's one side, but then you get to bring in the pieces of your home into this classroom as well. So I got to bring in hip hop that I love so much, blues music, and these different things. I got to introduce my students to barbecue. Good, real barbecue for the first time, and that serving as an English teaching assistant in that classroom, students would come in every day, and they viewed me as their Mr. Teacher, Mr. D, the teacher guy, the guy that has the real experience from a land and a place in the U.S. that they love very much, and so that's a huge role. But my biggest piece was coming back home. And talking to folks who just, unfortunately, and it's always in the back of my mind, won't get an opportunity to come here and won't get a chance to be in this country and do the programs that I've got to do. And so telling and exchanging about that and connecting with people around it and telling them that, you don't just have to be in the military to go to Germany. You don't just have to play a sport or sing a song to go to Germany. You can go to teach English. You can go to be a German Chancellor Fellow, a Bosch Fellow. You can go to do whatever you want, but it's there and it's accessible. That's big and important for me.
Okay, we have a last set of questions I really think brings together a lot of the elements of the discussion this evening, and that is the role, this is from Marianne Friese, related to the alumni network. I think that the alumni network could add a lot of value if there were global tracks or actions where there was follow-through action that would be generated also if there were a budget. It really is the notion of a Fulbright strategy that could add a module of Fulbright network actions to its programs. Maybe I'd like to ask each of you a couple of thoughts on that briefly, because we're really running out of time, and any closing comment that you want to make. Let me start then in, I think, the reverse order. Dee, let me start with you, then we'll go to Mirja and then to Paul.
Yeah, I mean, obviously invest in that. The tracks are important, and we have to have staying power. We have to be, Fulbright needs to be known amongst people other than just academics who studied and have a bachelor's degree or a graduate degree. It has to be known across the U.S., and so that's my big thing. That's my brief comment. That's my last comment. Yeah.
Thanks. Dee, Mirja?
Yeah, and to convince governments, of course, to invest in the program in the future as well, because that's the most important thing, to have the money to keep these exchanges going.
Paul, some final thoughts on Fulbright action networks or network actions.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea to maintain the momentum and the passion, the connections that exist that brought the awardees to their various opportunities. I think it's an excellent suggestion about having module of Fulbright actions. Question is how to support it, but I think there is the initiative, as was introduced by one of the awardees in the audience, and I would give that person the opportunity to explore that more fully as to what that means in a tangible sense, and to have some level of support to do that. But I think it's a good idea to engage across the generations of Fulbright scholars. We all share, at a personal level, a level of responsibility to the world we live in, a joy and a passion for the diversity of experiences that we've had, but certainly a level of responsibility. And I would say it comes down to, words, not complexity, things like hope, things like inclusion, things like compassion, and that's where the responsibility is. And I think if the Fulbright program can build on that and to champion the initiative and the passion of its awardees across the world, we will be a much healthier, stable, resilient world to live in.
I want to thank all of you for those final inspiring statements. I'm afraid we are nearing the end, but we're not quite done. We want to do one more instant poll, but I think that this panel really has demonstrated not only the tremendous impact that the Fulbright program has had on individuals, on your lives, the way you think, but also what you have done, what you are doing in the world. And I think one of the things that has come in so clearly across, the passion, the continued activation, the hope, the envisioning. And I think those are certainly qualities that we need more than ever in this world of very challenging, really daunting problems. Before we adjourn, however, I do want to take one more poll, and this is why I would refer you back to the Slido platform. And I would like to ask those of you who've been participating and listening into this discussion, what words do you associate with the Fulbright program and the Fulbright network? And let's take a few minutes and to see what comes in. Great, we have, I thought it was going to be lifted, but we have here ambassador, dynamic cultural exchange, intelligence, alumnus, mutual understanding, transformative, mind-changing, dynamic cultural exchange, ambassadorship, community, respect. Those are some great words. I would like to conclude by thanking, first of all, thank you to all of our participants from wherever you have may have been viewing today and participating. Thank you for your questions and for participating in the polls. I'd like to thank, of course, our panelists, Mirja Fiedler, Dee Polk, Paul Berkman. Paul, thank you particularly. It's always challenging to be the virtual participant, but I have to say, thanks to the great technical support here and the planning by the Fulbright Germany team, I think things have gone well. So thank you for joining on this on our first, I think, truly hybrid event, which is always difficult to do. My thank you also, of course, to Vito Cecere and to Elizabeth Horst for joining us here today, and for our other partners who on this event. A heartfelt thanks to my colleagues at the Fulbright Germany office, Kerstin Nowak, Jamie Moore, Jenny Witt, Victoria Hoffmann, who have done most of the hard work in organizing this event. Thank you also to the rest of the team who also contributed. In closing, I do want to say that as we start nearing the end of this celebratory year, 75 years of the Fulbright program, the celebrations are not over. We are looking forward to the 70th anniversary of the German-American Fulbright program in 2022, and to a continuation of today's conversations, I think some of which are difficult conversations. They're hard issues of inclusion, of activation, of sustaining programs, of finding the financial resources to do so. But as I think we've seen today, the Fulbright programs, the Fulbright network and community, more relevant, more necessary than ever. We need that hope, we need that passion, we need that vision that you have all brought to this discussion. So thank you to the panelists, thank you to our participants, and with that, I would say good evening, and we will close here. Thank you.
Stay healthy.
Yes, indeed.